Tobago, good afternoon to Tobagonians in the diaspora. I must also say it's evening now, good evening also to our friends and family in Trinidad who are joining us live for this press briefing. Earlier today, the Prime Minister, and I want to thank the Prime Minister, earlier today the Prime Minister asked the Honorable Attorney General and the Minister of Defense to come and to give me a briefing on matters relative to the installation at the A&R Robinson International Airport. At this meeting, we were also joined by the Chief of Defense Staff, Commodore Polo. We were also joined by the Chairman of the Airports Authority Board, Mr. Aaron Henry. I want to begin by making a few comments, and then I'll invite the Chief of the Minister of Defense to speak to us on some of the specific issues and challenges that we are having here in Tobago. I want to commence by acknowledging that the laws of Trinidad and Tobago does not give the Chief Secretary any real or perceived remit over national security and foreign affairs. And certainly any remit over any exercise akin to what we are seeing happening in our space. Let me also be clear that based on operations at the National Security Council, the Chief Secretary has never been a member of the National Security Council. And so decisions at National Security Council meetings very often are likely to not include the Chief Secretary's comments, opinions, and certainly briefings thereafter. There was only one instance, and I have experienced to date 3 Prime Ministers. There has been only one instance to which I was invited to a National Security Council meeting, and that's after I wrote the then Prime Minister for a meeting on national security issues in Tobago. We were having our highest murder rate in Tobago, and after almost a year or more, he eventually met with me along with some other members of the National Security Council right here in Tobago. But that was to treat with a matter indigenous to us here in Tobago. However, this is the first time as Chief Secretary I am being briefed on a matter as sensitive as this. And I want you to understand and appreciate what that means. It means that a Prime Minister is taking the decision to ask her ministers to brief the Chief Secretary on a matter of national and international security, for which ordinarily a Chief Secretary is not briefed. So I want to thank the Prime Minister for responding so quickly to my requests on Friday. Last week, we learned several things. So last week, I woke up a morning and was alerted by members of the media, Tobagonians on social media and on WhatsApp, indicating that planes were landing in Tobago. I also learned that the planes refueled in Tobago. I then learned that equipment was delivered in Tobago. I learned that Marines were present in Tobago, on the island of Tobago, and that they were staying out of a hotel here in Tobago. And I also learned that a local contractor, meaning a Trinidad and Tobago contractor, was contracted to work along with the authorities from United States. And I will ask Minister of Defense, Minister Sturge, to speak to the specifics surrounding these matters shortly. The Prime Minister earlier in last week spoke to the fact that 2 things are happening. One, she spoke to some civil works that is to take place at the new A&R Robinson International Airport. And then later in the week, as in sometime Thursday evening, she spoke about a radar system being installed here in Tobago. As a matter of fact, I only learned of her disclosure after I left a live television program late on Thursday night. And so Friday morning, which is yesterday morning, I reached out to the Prime Minister, and by today, Saturday, I had the benefit of a meeting and a briefing from these goodly gentlemen. Let me again stress that this is the very first time as Chief Secretary that a matter as sensitive as this, that is not a fifth schedule item, was ever brought to my attention and ever shared with me as a Chief Secretary. And so I want to thank the Honorable Prime Minister for affording me this privilege and for sending these ministers here in Tobago. I don't see that as being ordinary, and certainly I see that as being respectful enough to share that information. I want to point out that when I learned of these things happening last week, I did reach out to Minister of Defense, Minister Sturge, but true to his nature, he did not respond. And I understand today why he did not respond. He was not so authorized to respond to the Chief Secretary and to give the Chief Secretary the details the Chief Secretary was seeking on behalf of the people of Tobago. However, he has since received clearance from the head of the cabinet and the head of the National Security Council to provide me with some briefings concerning what's happening there at A.N.R. Robinson International Airport. And so, again, these are 6 scheduled items for which the Chief Secretary is now being briefed. And perhaps I'm happy the Attorney General is here. So when new bills for autonomy, Attorney General, comes your way, and you see that Tobago for the first time is putting elements of national security within those autonomy bills, it is because we have this experience where we think that there are some security matters for which the Chief Secretary should be a part of. Of course, that's a discussion for a later time. I've even seen raging debates online about whether or not a Chief Secretary should be a constant in the National Security Council or not. But again, that's a discussion for another time and place. And certainly, Mr. Attorney General, it is something that will come from Tobago as we explore what those autonomy provisions should look like. As we prepare to hear from Minister Sturge, there are some things I would like Minister Sturge to address for us and address to Tobagonians. And certainly, he's in the best position to indicate what information he can give, what he cannot give based on what might be sensitive. And I will urge the media to direct all future questions on the specifics of what is happening in our space to Minister Sturge, who I think is the one apt to answer on behalf of the government on this matter, unless otherwise advised by the Prime Minister. So, Minister Sturge, as you speak to us, I want you to speak to us about what kind of jurisdiction the U.S. Will have on our soil. I want you to tell us how a local contractor was engaged and who engaged them. I want you to answer the question for Tobagonians and the country on whether or not Tobago soil will be used to commit an act of war. And I want you to answer, if it is something you can answer to, the question of how long will U.S. personnel be on Tobago soil, among other matters. And then we'll return to any other issues that needs clarification. So go ahead, Mr. Sturge, all over to you.
Thank you, Chief Sec. Let me apologize in advance because I cannot give you answers to all of your questions because they involve serious national security considerations, and there's a limit to what could be disclosed to the public. because disclosure to the public means disclosure to the world, inclusive of the criminal element. If I can indicate to the viewing public, the Honorable Attorney General, Chief of Defense Staff Don Polo, and I, we are here in Tobago to brief, and we've briefed the Chief Secretary on matters occurring in the Crown Point area. Let me first say that the airport in Crown Point is not a launch pad for any military operations. There's in the Atlantic, very close by, the USS Gerald Ford, an aircraft carrier, which is the largest and most destructive moving object ever built, and it is there for that purpose, so that there's no need for our country, particularly Tobago, to be used for any military operation. If I can indicate that radar systems are not new to Tobago, indeed to Trinidad and Tobago, but at this time we've had some issues with the existing radar systems and their capabilities. The new radar equipment being installed in Tobago is being installed to strengthen our capabilities and to assist us with counter-trafficking in terms of drugs, arms and ammunition, and interestingly human trafficking, which is becoming somewhat of an issue in Tobago. You may not know that there have been and continue to be illegal flights almost daily, inclusive of drone flights, which deliver drugs and guns from the mainland, as the traffickers have now grown some common sense and they've learned to avoid the sea. Now, we must not forget that in December 2024, the last government, more particularly Dr. Keith Rowley, had signed the Status of Forces Agreement, and that agreement outlines the powers of the U.S. military in Trinidad and Tobago. So maybe he's someone you may wish to ask some questions. Lastly, I was just asked to address the Tobago public on the contractor, California Stoco. That is a Trinidadian company, but it's a company also registered in the United States of America, and I understand they do business in the United States of America. They were not hired by the THA, they are not being paid by the THA, but not much else I'm prepared to divulge as to the nitty-gritty with respect to that company.
Thank you, Minister Sturge. There's one other element I wish to address, the matter of civil works, because I've seen in this space some suggestion that the Prime Minister was lying about the civil works that needs to be done in Tobago. So I've asked the technical people to put on the screen a photograph. On this photograph that you should be seeing on your screen now has an area delineated in blue. I mean, blue is a very good color, especially in this season. But there's an area delineated in blue, and on that photograph you see two red markings. The area where those two red markings are constitutes property already owned by the Airports Authority, and by the way, this was provided to me by NITCO since October 6th, of works to be done. At that time, I just did not know who will do the works, but NITCO is the agency that's treating with the airport construction. So the areas cut off by red is already owned by Airports Authority. The other area is currently being acquired for the roadway. The entire blue line constitutes a roadway that takes you from the roundabout that is currently positioned in front of the new A&R Robinson Airport and runs behind Ravenel's Hotel and all the way down behind Apex to then be adjoined to the new road that we just constructed, which will allow for when the airport is open, that Airports Authority meets the regulations by FAA, that they are able to manage traffic, and that we now have sort of a large roundabout with all the traffic that's going eastward from the airport, going along Gaskin, will continue along Storbay Local Road from Gaskin Bay Road all the way to the new road, and all the traffic going west will go in one direction behind Apex, behind Ravenel's, to the front of the new A&R Robinson International Airport. The Prime Minister did in fact say some civil works, we will get some assistance with civil works from the US personnel that's here as well. With roadway, that's the civil works that she was talking about. So there is no untruth to that matter. That's one. And two, Minister Sturge spoke about the radar, which is the second element about why they are here. And so I think we have, or just one other question for you, Sturge. Someone wants to know, and this is whether or not you can answer it, whether or not the foreign forces who are here, person that's here, can do security operations in our public spaces, such as our public roadways and so on.
Well, as I understand it, right now, or maybe I should not even answer, because it's not really in the public interest, and what little I can say may lead to unnecessary speculation, because there's really, nothing harmful to be disclosed, but at the same time the nature of the operations and the nature of their visit is not something that should be disclosed to the wider public.
Finally, Attorney General, who is here, is there any other issue you think Minister Sturge is missing or I have missed from our discussions that is okay and should be placed in the public space?
I think that, I'm not sure that it was said, but the Status of Forces Agreement is not new. It is not something that we have inked recently. As a matter of fact, we have a history, we're going back more than a decade of such agreements with the United States. The last one, I think, as the minister said, being executed by the former government in 2024 and coming into force early in January of 2025. So that agreement governs the presence of U.S. personnel and the activities, other things like tax concessions and so on are dealt with in the agreement.
Well, just to add and demystify what is in the public domain, there should be no real alarm about military personnel being in Trinidad and Tobago. That is not something new. That happens routinely from time to time. And in fact, right now, we have forces from the Cayman Islands who are here. And they are not involved in any sort of activity that would be inimical to our national interests, but they are here. And I don't believe the U.S. is either. We've benefited. The short point is, what the U.S., what they have done in international waters in pursuance of their own objectives has redounded to our benefit, because as you see, there's been a marked, a very significant decrease in violent crime, more particularly murders, almost half. We've got it down to almost half. And now that you are not seeing boats targeted by the U.S. with regularity. One would take notice that there's no shortage of fish. Fishermen are still fishing. So those who are acting legally continue to act legally without being targeted. But because of the actions of the U.S. in international waters, the country as a whole has benefited in terms of murders. And now the drug traffickers, they have to up their game, change their strategy, and we are seeing it. They are making other advances in other ways, and we are simply here to ensure that we are also abreast and sometimes ahead of them so that we can basically deal with their nefarious activities before it affects us.
And just two or three observations. One, please note that the state of forces agreement that was just mentioned, that was signed, nobody consulted the chief secretary on it, and I've never seen it.
So that wasn't us. That was your
I
former
know,
prime minister.
but I'm just making the point that that it's very common that these agreements are made and chief secretaries are not involved. We have had agreements made with neighboring Caribbean and CARICOM territories to Tobago over, for example, use of our waters, for which Tobago was just never consulted before those agreements. So that's pretty common, and of course sharpens the conversation and the request for us to speed up this issue with Tobago autonomy and what that means. Second observation, the question is being asked online that it's not the first time we're seeing state of forces agreement, but it's the first time we're seeing raiders, and that's also not true. We have had, I saw someone sent me today a news article from maybe as far back as 2018 or thereabout, where there was assistance from the very US for setting up of a radar system in Stubbs Bay, Chaguaramas. So it is not the first time radars are being set up in the country by the US government as a gift to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So I wanted to make that that clarification. And finally, I want to allay some fears over this matter. I have said something that I've also heard the Prime Minister say. I've heard the Prime Minister say that Trinidad and Tobago has not taken a position whereby it is using its soil, its waters, to launch any attack against any other foreign and sovereign territory. And so, essentially, Trinidad and Tobago is not a part of any war. I don't know that Trinidad and Tobago could stop Trump from doing whatever Trump wants to do. And when you heard the description of the vessel and assets that the US have out in the Atlantic right now, it's evident that they don't need our soil nor our waters to do anything. They can do it from international international space and international waters. And so I have said publicly that as your Chief Secretary Tobago, I will not support any installation that is meant to attack anybody anywhere else. And the government of Trinidad and Tobago continues to assure that that which is being installed here is not meant to attack anybody anywhere else, but to provide much needed information for our defense systems and our security services. Do I have that correct, Mr. AG? Right, so, and we continue to hold that position. The central government has not changed that position. I have not heard the Prime Minister change her position on that matter. I continue to hold that position firmly too. And so I want to allay the fears. I'm in a position now that I can allay the fears of the island of Tobago that we are not at war with anyone else. And I noted it at my live media event on Thursday night that for Tobago Day next week, I'm having the Charge d'Affaires here from the U.S. Embassy, who is currently the highest ranked U.S. diplomat in Trinidad and Tobago at this time, since a new ambassador has not been installed. And we are scheduled to meet the day after the Tobago Day event. Secondly, at the said Tobago Day event, I am having the Venezuelan ambassador here. So in other words, both territories that at this point may have some choice words for each other will be on Tobago soil at the same time, which very much underscores Trinidad and Tobago's objective of simply being good with all the other countries in the world that we can be good with, save and except if you're no longer good to us, and that we are not at war with anybody. We continue to enjoy diplomatic relations with both the U.S. and Venezuela, and until that changes, that is what it is. But I wish to allay the fears of Tobagonians, and I wish to state categorically that Tobago soil is not being used to attack anybody anywhere else. And so this fear of being attacked as a reprisal is something that we can dismiss from our minds at this time. All right? I think we have addressed all the areas. And just to recap quickly in closing, I express some gratitude to the Prime Minister, in fact, significant gratitude to the Prime Minister for being the first to brief a Chief Secretary on a matter as sensitive as this, and that is also a foreign affairs matter. Secondly, we spoke about what I learned last week, and I also share that on Friday morning, after learning of the Prime Minister's announcement of the radar, I reached out to her about being briefed and thinking that it, although I'm not legally a requirement for such a briefing, that she should extend the briefing to my office. Today, which is a day later, such briefing was extended to my office. Minister Sturge shared the information that he can in fact share with the public, and I will not come afterwards to share anything that will be sensitive in nature, and I will ask that further questions be directed directly to Minister Sturge hereafter on the specifics about what's happening there. And of course, if you have those questions and they come to my ear or my office, I will ask them on your behalf and share with you the answer that he gives. I did share the extent of the kind of civil works that is required, and that's of course not the only civil work required for the airport to be opened. There are other matters that they are currently treating with, including getting fuel directly to the terminal there. So I shared that with the public, and I shared a drawing that NITCO shared with me earlier, sometime last month, or I can't remember what date I met with NITCO, might be last month or some weeks ago. And why that road work is needed. The minister spoke to the kind of jurisdiction that they have on island and in country, owing to the State of Forces agreement, and not being able to go any further than that. And we got very clearly a reiteration of something the Prime Minister said, which is that our soil is not going to be used to commit an act of war against anyone else. So I think we have addressed all of the pertinent areas. And so I wish to thank you very much. I wish to say this though, in closing. As Chief Secretary, it's not customary for me to leave my home or my church on a Sabbath to have any meeting of state, save and except if it's one that's urgent or emergent. And I think this was one that so warranted it. So you must know that to see me out here on a Saturday afternoon into evening, that the matter warranted my attention today, so that I could duly allay the fears of all Tobagonians and Trinidadians about what's happening here in Tobago. So again, thank you very much for your patience. Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for obliging to my request and sending these goodly ministers and the CDS here and the chair of the Airports Authority to provide the necessary updates. Thank you, and God's richest blessings.